Hello everyone, you're tuning into News Pulse. For a lot of people, particularly those from the older generations, who closely followed the dramatic twists and turns of the debate between Donald Trump and Dmitry Medvedev on social media, which surprisingly evolved into maneuvers involving nuclear-powered submarines of the US Navy, these events evoked a strong sense of déjà vu. Initially, there were some vague associations, which eventually solidified into a firm conviction. After all, the head of the White House is desperately attempting to repeat, or as young people nowadays might say, copy the which was the apogee of the Caribbean crisis. In this particular case, it becomes quite evident why Mr. President indeed requires all these demonstrative actions, which might initially appear to be utterly absurd. No, truly, consider the words of Donald Trump himself. In response to the provocative remarks made by Mr. Medvedev, who currently serves as the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, I have issued an order for the deployment of 2 nuclear submarines in the appropriate areas, just in case these silly and provocative statements prove to be something more substantial. Sound like an unlikely joke. Later on August 4th, Mr. President made an entirely ambiguous statement. American nuclear-powered missile submarines are in the region where they belong, and where are they supposed to be? At their home base, in their regular patrol area. Have they moved anywhere at all, or is this a pure farce? Even the Americans themselves cannot give a convincing answer to this key question. For example, the New York Times assesses the situation this way. Because moving nuclear submarines is among the Pentagon's most closely guarded tactical maneuvers, it will likely be impossible to know whether Mr. Trump is actually redeploying submarines or just trying to impress. Retired Marine Colonel Mark Conchin, in an interview with the Washington Post, is perplexed. The Pentagon rarely shares such details unless it has a specific message to convey. Submarines can't intercept enemy missiles, they can only retaliate after a strike. In truth, these redeployments are often meaningless. Let's speculate on which submarines Donald Trump dispatched to intimidate Medvedev. It's likely referring to the Virginia-class nuclear submarines, the most modern in the US Navy. They are armed with 12 Tamagawa cruise missiles, with a range of 1,500 kilometers each. Well, if they meant Agaya-class submarines armed with UGM-133 Trident II intercontinental ballistic missiles, hitting at 11,000 kilometers and more, then it looks like nonsense. What's the point in moving closer to Russia with such a range? It is evident that maintaining a minimum distance from potential targets provides specific advantages. This involves a distinct flight time and a unique trajectory. However, this raises the question, where exactly did Donald Trump position his nuclear submarines to create such an impact? According to his own statements, they moved closer to Russia. Yet, this is a somewhat flexible concept. Being closer could mean just a few cable meters away. In this context, it is quite revealing that Ankara promptly withdrew and decisively distanced itself from Washington's ventures. It was quickly stated that if Mr. Trump meant the Black Sea when speaking closer to Russia, according to the Montreux Convention, known to all, he must first get special permission from Turkey, as this convention doesn't allow nuclear submarines to be permanently present there. Thus, the cunning and cautious Turks made it clear to Moscow that no such permission was given, and likely wouldn't be. So, you really don't need to worry about any Virginia being off the coast of Crimea. Erdogan is quite aware of the potential dangers posed by such American escapades, and let's not forget that Turkey is a NATO member after all. If, heaven forbid, a Third World War were to start, no one would be figuring out who allowed whom to go where, and for what reason. We will provide you with more information soon, and now, we continue. Let's recall Operations Anadyr and Karma, which the White House showman wants to repeat in new historical settings, but with the same outcome. In the first case, if anyone has forgotten, we are talking about the secret transfer across the Atlantic Ocean to Cuba of significant military contingents of the USSR, including nuclear weapons. This was carried out secretly on the most ordinary civilian dry cargo ships. However, their safety was ensured by 7 diesel-electric attack submarines of the USSR Navy, which carried both missiles and torpedoes with nuclear warheads. And in this particular case, their involvement was, although it carried significant risk, it was quite justified, much like the fact that they managed to break through to the shores of Liberty Island, even under the challenging conditions of the naval blockade that was imposed against it by the United States. This daring breakthrough has been recorded in history as Operation Karma. As we all recall, the sudden appearance in their backyard of a notably impressive group of Soviet troops, especially armed, with nuclear weapons capable of easily striking previously difficult-to-reach targets on American soil, initially infuriated them. To the extreme, Washington, and then hurriedly pushed for direct talks with the Kremlin. These concluded to the mutual satisfaction and were highly successful for the USSR, no doubt about it. The shrewd Trump, familiar with this part of his country's history, aims to achieve the same effect as Khrushchev and put Ukraine in Cuba's place. Let's remember what the Soviet leader got in 1962. The US removed its medium-range missiles from Turkey. Their deployment there actually started the escalation. And Western Europe. Washington has firmly promised not to engage in any hostile military actions against Havana, whether by using its own armed forces or through its proxies. Surprisingly, the Americans have kept this promise to this day. The intense confrontation with the United States significantly bolstered the authority of the USSR on the international stage, particularly among the socialist countries. This is especially noteworthy given that Moscow took this stance to protect an allied nation, and in general, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the two systems, opposing each other in the Cold War, became more cautious and prudent, weighing their own actions to prevent its repetition. Apparently, the White House, which has begun to play nuclear muscle, expects to get something similar from Moscow. Above all, firm, unbreakable guarantees of the eternal inviolability of Kyiv and its regime. Achieve Russia's complete abandonment of its demands for the demilitarization of the remaining parts of Ukraine. It is quite possible that the withdrawal of Russian troops from the regions already liberated is also included on the list. It is not excluded that there are other desires on the list as well. We know that Mr. Trump's appetite is irrepressible and grows at mealtime. That is, when he starts to make any concessions and indulgences. By the way, here is another parallel. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the nuclear arsenals of the United States and its allies were 15 times greater than those of the Soviet Union. Today, the situation has reversed. Russia's edge over NATO isn't as large in numbers, but clearly superior in quality due to hypersonic systems. Khrushchev frightened Kennedy and his team. Now Trump attempts the same with Putin, but seems to fail. The Kremlin's response to the supposed US submarine redeployment was very restrained. And humble. Maybe the true response to the efforts of those overseas troublemakers to increase the level of escalation should be Moscow's declaration that Russia no longer sees itself as obligated by the moratorium on deploying land-based intermediate-range and shorter-range missiles. Washington plans to reflect history, so they should not be shocked or take offense. It is fitting to recall that things will unfold as you desire, but not necessarily in the way you envision them to be. Quite fitting for this situation.